If you enjoy this video, please remember to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you see on my channel and would like to support me on Patreon, click on the link below. With the somewhat lackluster performance of Star Trek Insurrection, it was unsure where they would go for the following Star Trek film. Star Trek Nemesis would unfortunately bring about the end of the Star Trek Next Generation film franchise. This would sadly be the Next Generation's fourth and final film due to performing terribly at the box office. Producer Rick Berman blamed the bad performance of Nemesis on the competition of other films. Patrick Stewart, however, would blame the failure of Nemesis on franchise fatigue. After the disappointment of Insurrection, the studio was unsure if a fourth Next Generation film would be made. It was actually a phone call between Brent Spiner and his friend, John Logan, the writer of Gladiator, that led to the film's development. Logan was promised full control over the screenplay by producer Rick Berman. Jonathan Frakes was not asked to return as director, although Frakes would have said yes if asked. Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II and Star Trek VI, was approached by Berman to direct. However, Meyer wanted full control over the screenplay and wanted to do a rewrite of the screenplay. Berman was forced to refuse, as he had already promised John Logan full control over the screenplay. Meyer would then decline the offer. Actor LeVar Burton was keen to direct, but was turned down by the studio. The studio was more interested in hiring Stewart Baird, an editor who was known for editing mainly action films, over 20 films including Superman the movie in 1978. Nemesis would be Baird's third film as director. He had previously directed Executive Decision and U.S. Marshals. Producer Rick Berman thought Baird would bring, as he said, fresh blood to the film, and he enjoyed the director's sense of fun that existed in his first film, Executive Decision. In a promotional interview for the film, Baird would go on to say that this film was perhaps a little different from the dynamics of the previous films. Screenplay writer John Logan came up with many ideas originally, and the idea of a clone of Captain Picard by the name Shinzon was brought into the script early on. Shinzon, the exact clone of Captain Picard, was originally going to have Patrick Stewart play both roles. One underlying theme of Star Trek Nemesis was supposed to be about the crew moving on in their positions. The characters Will Riker and Deanna Troi marry, and Riker would become the newly promoted captain of the USS Titan, and Data would become the new first officer of the Enterprise, while Dr. Beverly Crusher would also leave the Enterprise to head up Starfleet Medical. This theme of moving on was still loosely kept in the final film. One draft of the script would have the Shinzon ship, the Scimitar, having its warp core located on the bridge. During a climatic ending, Data would destroy the ship by shooting the warp core. Technical consultant for the film, Rick Sternbach, demanded that this be changed, feeling that it was illogical and inconsistent with the past Star Trek episodes. So the finished film would end with the weapons generator being moved to just behind the bridge. In an earlier version of the script, there was even talks of the film featuring Data's evil brother, Lore, in the film. The original thought of John Logan, Brent Spiner, and Rick Berman was to have a follow-up film to Nemesis, which would see the Enterprise crew crossing over with the characters of Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and would feature Riker's ship, the USS Titan, and its crew members. But due to very poor box office reception of Star Trek Nemesis, the idea was scrapped. I personally think this would have been amazing. In one early draft of the script, Ashley Judd was supposed to briefly reprise her role of Robin Leffler, which was her reoccurring role from the television series Star Trek The Next Generation. Actress Denise Crosby also briefly discussed with executive producer Rick Berman the possibility of using her Next Generation Romulan character, Sela, in the film, but they couldn't work out a proper way to fit the character into the movie. Baird was not at all familiar with the Star Trek franchise. He was of course aware of it, but knew absolutely nothing about it. This was not at all rare for a director of a Star Trek film to know nothing about the franchise. Director Nicholas Meyer knew nothing about the franchise going into Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, but he familiarized himself with the show to understand it better. However, Stewart Baird did not make a clear effort to get to know the franchise, and this showed during the making of Nemesis. Baird even refused to watch the Next Generation TV series to prepare, and reportedly went so far by saying he hated the franchise but forced himself to watch the Star Trek films regardless. Actors LeVar Burton and Marina Sirtis hated working with the director. LeVar Burton's name was mispronounced by the director countless times, and the director was heard calling him Laverne a number of times. He even thought LeVar Burton's character, Geordie LaForge, was an alien instead of a character with cybernetic eyes. The director was criticized by actors for not watching any of the episodes of The Next Generation. Marina Sirtis, on set, bluntly called Stewart Baird an idiot. Sirtis almost didn't return as Deanna Troi for the film. She was also threatened to be fired from Nemesis and replaced by Jerry Ryan.
What's challenging, I mean, Stewart's a really nice bloke, but to have someone come in who's never ever seen Star Trek before, and when you say to him, you know, well, my character wouldn't do that, and he says, I don't care, do it anyway. You know, first of all, you want to punch his lights out, but second of all, he is the director, and you kind of have to do what he says, because he just keeps making you do it over and over again until you do. So there was a kind of, I don't know, it was almost like you had to kind of go with it and say, okay, I'm just going to see what happens, try and find a way to make this work.
Jerry Ryan said during a 2014 convention that the studio actually wanted her to play a bigger role as her character 7 of 9, while replacing one of the regular characters. Ryan's biggest concern was that her presence in the movie would make no sense, as her character didn't know anyone from the Next Generation crew. The studio would then offer her a cameo as a guest at Riker and Troy's wedding, which she also refused because that would make even less sense. Though initially, I think the studio just wanted to replace Marina Sirtis, who nearly didn't return as Deanna Troi due to negotiations not going well. The small cameo was then given to Kate Mulgrew to a character Admiral Janeway instead. In the film, Janeway gives Captain Picard his orders to Romulus. Majel Barrett Roddenberry was unable to make a cameo as Luxama Troi for the wedding scene, but she was also working on the other Gene Roddenberry series, Andromeda, of which Majel was the executive producer. Gene Roddenberry came up with the idea for the series in the 70s, but the series did not get made until 9 years after Roddenberry's death in 1991. All the regular cast members of The Next Generation returned for the film. Patrick Stewart was paid nearly as much for this movie as he made in the entire run of Star Trek The Next Generation, although Stewart and Brent Spiner both accepted salary cuts in order to keep the film's budget under control. For the part of Praetor Shinzon, actor Jude Law was originally considered for the role. James Masters, who played Spike in the series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, also auditioned for the role. Tom Hardy, who was at the time an unknown, was cast as Praetor Shinzon. In an interview, Tom Hardy said that he took the film role very seriously. Nemesis was his first big break.
I was bald anyway when I turned up to do the movie, because I was doing a French Polynesia movie, so I've been bald in most of the films I've done, had no hair, so it was really how it came. And I think in the original script I had a mane of blonde hair, and I don't think that was going to work, actually. But I was going to go for just a little tram line here, like a Tyson thing, but that last minute went out, and we stuck with just the shaven bullet look.
The name Shinzon is actually Chinese. This name was chosen by writer John Logan as it continued the trend of Romulan characters having Chinese names. The meaning of Shinzon is loosely adapted in Mandarin as inside one's heart. Will Wheaton, thanks to LeVar Burton having a word to Rick Berman, was invited back as Wesley Crusher, but most of his scenes were cut from the final version of the film. In a deleted scene, Wesley has a brief conversation with Picard, and Wesley is now a lieutenant in Operations Yellow Division and has returned to Starfleet as a member of Captain Riker's engineering crew on the USS Titan. Actor Ron Perlman plays the Riemann Viceroy. The Riemann Viceroy's look is inspired by Count Orlok from the 1922 silent film Nosferatu. Riemanns, who debut in this film, are a side species of the Romulans. Principal photography for the film took place from November 2001 to March 2002. Director Baird had a very un-Star Trek-like approach to the film. He wanted to add energy to the action scenes and added a scene such as a car chase sequence.
In my opinion, Star Trek is about action-adventure. It is a good time.
We are given a futuristic, all-terrain vehicle to drive. I am so psyched. I feel I'm doing the Baja 400. Isn't that what it's called?
I feel like I'm doing it with him.
Director Baird called the scene a signature piece for the film. During principal photography, some of the cast criticized director Stewart Baird over his direction of this film, claiming that he hated Star Trek and knew nothing about it. He found that the cast would discuss any issues they had with the direction he gave to their characters. Baird had hoped that Nemesis would be enough of a success that he could consider whether to direct the next Star Trek film. Frakes, despite directing the previous two films and having a great knowledge of how a Star Trek movie should be made, was never approached by Baird, and Baird would never seek any advice and opinions on the direction of the film from Frakes. Despite this, Jonathan Frakes said that there was no resentment to the director. Director Baird became frustrated for needing to tell a story in an established universe with pre-existing design and character relationships. While reading the script for the dramatic death of the most beloved character of the crew, Data, Marina Sirtis began crying. She called Brent Spiner and was extremely upset. Spiner jokingly reminded her that Data was a fictional character and he is in fact still alive. Spiner got his wish. He originally wanted Data to be killed off in Insurrection. Spiner felt that he was becoming too old for the character. During the farewell scene in Captain Picard's reading room, near the film's ending, the scene had to be reshot after Patrick Stewart unintentionally started crying. Executive producer Rick Berman stated that almost 50 minutes worth of scenes cut from the film, and the scenes would have served to further the characters. Instead, they went for more emphasis on action rather than character. I've always thought that that's what really makes Star Trek work as a franchise, the characters. Stewart Baird, however, commented that though Nemesis was trimmed to the wire, the extended cut would be for the actors and had absolutely nothing to do with him. The music to Star Trek Nemesis was composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith, who has composed most of the Star Trek films, including the motion picture Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, Star Trek First Contact, and Insurrection, as well as the themes to the television series Star Trek The Next Generation, which was arranged by composer Dennis McCarthy, and the main theme for Star Trek Voyager. Star Trek Nemesis would sadly be his final score for a feature film. He sadly passed away in 2004. After the release of Star Trek Nemesis, some critics were less than kind, and some were mixed. Critic Roger Ebert had mixed feelings about the film, stating, "I'm smiling like a good sport, and trying to get with the dialogue, and gradually it occurs to me that Star Trek is over for me. I've been looking at these stories for half a lifetime, and let's face it, they're out of gas." The film was the franchise's lowest moneymaker at the box office. It certainly had stiff competition, being released close to hits like Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and the second Harry Potter film. However, Nemesis was the most successful Star Trek film in Germany, of all places. Sadly, Star Trek seemed dead, with not just the movie failing, but Enterprise being axed after only 4 seasons, even though the fan base was huge, and fans fought to keep the show on. Star Trek seemed to have, as Patrick Stewart would call it, Star Trek fatigue. Nemesis seemed to lack the fun and great character moments, or should I say heart, that the past Star Trek films offered. Nemesis comes across as a very hollow action film and less of a character film, which you can clearly blame on the director, who had no idea about Star Trek and refused to even watch the Next Generation series, to get acquainted with the great storylines and characters, and a whopping 50 minutes of great scenes were deleted from the film. Don't get me wrong, the film has its moments, and there are some great scenes, but overall the film meanders into something less than stellar. This is just my personal opinion, of course. I'm sure the film has its followers who appreciate it for what it brings, but it doesn't feel like Star Trek to me. One can only wonder how successful the new Star Trek series with the long-awaited return of Captain Jean-Luc Picard will be. We'll find out soon enough. My name's Jonathan. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe if you haven't already.